January 15th, 1838, night. I had the pleasure of letting my mind wander off and to let my thoughts take me away from such a cruel world. This led me to remembering the times of when I went hunting out in the woods. I would sometimes leave the house and not return until 2 or 3 days later. I carried my butterfly knife, rifle, and hatchet whenever I went out. On my trips out, I was accustomed to meeting other Cherokee Indians. They taught me their ways of hunting as well as their language, Salagi. Those, those skills later proved to be helpful when I enrolled in the American Army as a private soldier. I was sent as an interpreter to help with the relocation of these Cherokees. I'd become good friends with one of the men in the tribe. He was known as a Hote, which means restless one. We met when I was 15. He was like a brother to me, although it had been years since I last saw him. A sudden noise had disrupted my thinking and brought me back to reality. I look over to my left and see a mother being dragged out by her hair and thrown upon the ground by another soldier. Her cries overpowered the man screaming as he went inside the teepee and dragged out 2 more kids. Suddenly, a Cherokee man who was already on a wagon ran over to comfort his wife, only to find himself thrusted onto the ground. The soldier then pointed his pistol and shot the man right then and there for not cooperating and obeying the orders. All of them had their hands tied with a rope behind their backs. Disturbed by the scene, I looked away, only to find that the same thing was occurring all around me. I no longer heard the woman's cry, for it was then the screaming and crying of others around the camp that blocked her out. Not 30 minutes later, the camp lay deserted. All of the people were thrown into wagons, cramped up, nearly sitting on one another. Some had to even walk on the side of it to make room for others. We headed toward the bayonet point, entering the stockades. I noticed some kids in the back stood up and waved goodbye to their home. On my way there, the image of the dead man was still on my mind. I could still hear the screaming of the woman. To calm myself down, I threw some water from my jug onto my face and wiped it away with a piece of cloth. As I looked down, I noticed there was a smudge of blood on it, and immediately the image of the man replayed in my head. I threw the piece of cloth on the side of the road. February 6th, 1838. Night. It started to rain on my way there, and then 10 minutes later it started to snow. The poor people were freezing, as they don't wear shoes like us or have blankets. There were no beds for either of them to sleep on, and sometimes they would have to sleep on the ground. The bitter cold gave many pneumonia, and so many had died in one night I stopped counting. In one family, a woman gave her only blanket to a child whose parents were both killed. 2 days later, that child died from sickness. I tried my best to ease their pain throughout the trip. When I was on duty, I would discreetly give up my coat to a child so they could warm up for a while. In the mornings, I was ordered to help with the burial of those who died the night before, carrying men, women, and children. Their bodies were so cold to the touch, and one had looked so peaceful like he was asleep. I've had conversations with a lot of the families when I can, even though I probably should be resting. They were kind and gentle people, always trying to repay my kindness in some way. I didn't appreciate one soldier who traveled along with my wagon. His name was Fred Sanders, and he carried a whip with him on his belt. I caught him once whipping and beating an old Cherokee man for not walking at the pace of others. I was so infuriated at the sight, I caught Fred's hand before he could lay another strike on the poor man. He was all so irritated for me stopping him that he hit me, leaving a deep scratch across my forehead. I fired back using the hatchet I carried with me on my belt, and Fred was carried away. March 10th, 1838. Night. This journey has taken so much out of me. As much as I worry for the people of the tribe, I worry for my family back home too. I kept thinking over and over why I joined the army in the first place. Seeing these people who helped me suffer was too much for my heart to bear. The letter from my wife is the only thing that comforts me now. I read her letter over and over to take away my loneliness. On the back of the letter there is a picture that my daughters, Anna and Anise, drew. It's of 2 butterflies flying across a sun-barren sky. I hold this letter very close to me and keep it in my breast pocket of my blouse at all times. As much as I care for these people, I do want to get back to my family as soon as I can. Sometimes I wish I could leave, but the thought of it is a sin. I can't leave this tribe now, especially when they need all the help they can get. I look up and the snow has dissipated, thankfully. I hope the rest of the trip will be easier for all of us. We should arrive there by next month, hopefully. I must go on my shift now. I hope to write more next time. March 26th, 1839, night. The sufferings I have witnessed of the Cherokees was awful. The trail of the exiles was a trail of death. They were sleeping in wagons and on the ground without fire. I knew of as many as 22 of them to die in one night just of pneumonia. Among those 22, the beautiful Christian wife of Chief John Ross, being the noble-hearted woman she was, died a martyr to a child, giving her only blanket for the protection of a sick child. I made the long journey to the west with the Cherokees and did all I could to alleviate their sufferings. While on guard duty, I have given some sick children warmth from my overcoat. I was on guard duty the night Mrs. Ross died. When relieved at midnight, I did not retire. I remained around the wagon to show sympathy for Chief Ross. The next morning, her body was buried in a shallow grave by the roadside far from her native home. December 11th, 1890. Our young people will never fully understand the enormity of the crime that was committed against a helpless race. School children of today do not know that we are living on lands that were taken from a helpless race at the bayonet point to satisfy the white man's greed. My hope is that future generations will remember that private soldiers like myself, and like the 4 Cherokees who were forced by General Scott to shoot an Indian chief and his children. When Scott invaded the Indian country, some of the Cherokees fled to caves or dens in the mountains. They were never captured, and they're still there today. I've intended on going there and trying to find them. I've put it off year after year because I'm just too frail to ride that far. My rifle nor my knife were stained with Cherokee blood. 25 years after the removal, I was still known as the soldier that was good to us. Somebody must explain the blood that flowed in the Indian country in the summer of 1838. The 4,000 silent graves. To this day, I can still picture the 645 wagons traveling over the frozen ground.